let's stop playing games. You've seen the photos, you've seen the structure. The Paul VI Audience Hall in the Vatican is a damned snake. I'm not talking symbolism or poetic metaphors. I'm talking literal architectural design. The building looks like a reptile from the outside. From the inside, it's even worse. You've got two windows shaped like eyes, a stage that curves like a serpent's mouth, and a ceiling that looks like scales. If you need someone to explain that away as a coincidence, you're already too far gone. Now, here's where it gets worse. At the front of the hall, where you'd expect a cross, a holy altar, something sacred, you've got this disgusting monstrosity called the Resurrection by Pericle Fazzini. It's supposed to represent a man emerging from the ashes of nuclear chaos. But don't insult your own intelligence. It's not a man, it's a twisted demonic figure bursting through hell, surrounded by tortured forms. The face is deformed, the posture isn't triumphant, it's threatening. If that's your idea of the Son of God, you've already swallowed the Vatican's programming. Ask yourself, why would the headquarters of the largest religious institution on earth design its primary hall of communication to resemble a snake's head? Why is the central sculpture horrifying instead of holy? Why are all their artistic expressions saturated in symbols of death, mutation, and reptilian design? Because it's not just about aesthetics. This is architecture as control. Architecture as initiation. They don't build symbols for the sheep. They build them for each other, the ones who are in on it. They are speaking in plain sight, but only to those who know how to read it. Let's talk location. Beneath St. Peter's Basilica is the Vatican necropolis. It's a real place with real access. Inside you find burial tombs dating back to the early Christian era, but one tomb stands out. Archaeologists label it that way. But here's the kicker. Some ancient references, including twisted misreadings of Latin engravings and medieval speculation, have linked this tomb to Lucifer. And before you go running to a seminary-trained apologist, understand this: Lucifer in pre-Christian tradition was a bearer of knowledge and rebellion. Over time, it morphed into the name for Satan, but we're not dealing with semantics here. We're dealing with a tome, a structure under Vatican ground tied directly or symbolically to the being they preach against every single Sunday. Why would that name even be found down there? And don't feed me the academic drive about linguistic errors. They know what they're doing. Now look at the rituals. The Holy Door in St. Peter's people think it's just some annual religious celebration. Wrong. That door is sealed shut from the inside, opened only during Jubilee years. That's not tradition, that's ritual sealing, symbolic gateways, occult meaning. In many esoteric systems, a sealed door is a barrier between worlds. When opened, it invites something through. You think it's just for pilgrims. You think a pope walks through a golden arch and that's it. Wake up. These aren't ceremonies, these are invocations, these are access points. Let's jump to another obvious tale. The language in official Vatican rites, the name Lucifer is still used in Latin. During the Easter Vigil, they chant in Latin Flemmer's Lucifer, Matutinus invigniat ael inquam Lucifer, quistum, which translates to may the morning star find its flame. That Lucifer, I say, who never sets. That's not a conspiracy. That's straight from their liturgy. And don't let them gaslight you into thinking it means something else. It's not an accident. They could have rewarded it centuries ago. You still think we're dealing with holy men. These people built an empire on guilt, fear, and blood, and under the surface, under the marble, under the robes and gold, there's a structure, a design not for salvation, but control. Not to lead you to heaven, but to keep you in submission. There's more. Go back to the architecture again. The Vatican Observatory, yes, they have one, is located in Castel Gandolfo, but the powerful telescope is operated in Arizona, USA. It's called Lucifer. I'm not making that up. It stands for Large Binocular Telescope, Near Infrared Utility with Camera, an integral field unit for extragalactic research, and the Vatican uses it alongside Jesuit astronomers. Let that sink in. Why does a religious institution obsessed with sin and salvation have a stake in tracking deep space objects with a telescope named Lucifer? Because their God isn't your God. Because you're not part of their inner circle. Because the Vatican is a mask. Because beneath the pomp and prayers, they're running an entirely different game. You've seen the throne room, you've seen the art, the reptilian architecture, the demonic sculptures, the chants invoking Lucifer, the doors that open once a generation. And you still think this is about God. They count on your ignorance. They bank on your faith being passive, blind, and terrified to question. They told you Lucifer was the enemy. Meanwhile, they built him a house. And not just any house. A temple right in the heart of Rome, right under your nose. Let's stop pretending the Vatican is just a religious institution. It's a geopolitical superpower with spiritual branding. It's not just the rituals or the buildings anymore. It's the hierarchy, the network, and the agenda. We're talking about a global intelligence operations hiding behind stained glass and Latin prayers. And at the very top of this structure sits a dark event almost no one wants to talk about publicly: the enthronement of Lucifer. This isn't internet rumor trash. This came directly from insiders like Father Malachi Martin, Jesuit priest, exorcist, insider. He served in the Vatican for years before exposing the rot within. According to Martin, something happened in 1963 that permanently altered the spiritual infrastructure of the Church. He claimed that a secret ceremony, an actual enthronement of Lucifer, was performed inside the Vatican, not symbolic, not metaphorical. A full-blown ritual welcoming the adversary as the guiding spirit of the institution. And before you throw him under the crazy label, understand this: Martin wasn't a dropout. He was multilingual, highly educated, trusted by popes. And embedded in the upper echelon of Vatican politics, he had access. And when he started to speak publicly, things got real uncomfortable, real fast. Interviews were cut, transcripts were censored, his warnings were dismissed by cowards in robes, who feared exposure more than they feared damnation. He claimed the ritual happened in 2 locations simultaneously, inside the Vatican and somewhere in the US. Think about that, a coordinated ceremonial spiritual hijack across continents. Not to bless the Church, not to honor God, but to install Lucifer as the puppet master behind the curtain. You think that's outrageous? Go read his book, Windswept House. It's fiction on the surface, but anyone with a brain can read between the lines. The names are altered, the events dramatized. But the architecture of power, the cultic networks, and the satanic infiltration are all real, all based on sources and events he couldn't name directly without being eliminated. And for those who say there's no proof, of course there's no official proof. You think the people running this show are sloppy enough to leave signed confession letters on gold-plated Vatican desks. They operate through secrecy, oaths, compartmentalization, and ceremonial ritual masked as religion. That's how occult systems work. You hide everything in plain sight, and you surround it with enough tradition, enough incense, and enough Latin that nobody sees it for what it is. Let's talk about infiltration. This wasn't a one-night event. The Vatican wasn't taken over in one ritual. This has been a generational process. It started decades ago, possibly centuries back, with key positions in the church being handed off to initiates, men loyal not to a man, but to an esoteric doctrine, a doctrine that reveres the serpent, worships knowledge over obedience, and sees Lucifer not as a fallen angel, but as a liberator. We're not talking about the priests who run local churches or nuns teaching kids in schools. Most of them have no idea what's going on. They're pawns, useful, innocent. The real game is at the top: cardinals, shadow bishops, secret orders, and financial syndicates tied directly to the Roman Curia. And when you look at the decisions they make, it all adds up, covering up systemic abuse for decades, shuffling predators like chess pieces, laundering billions through Vatican bank channels, protecting war criminals, partnering with intelligence agencies. You think that's religion? That's mafia. Let's not forget the Vatican Bank, formerly called the Institute for the Works of Religion. That's a hilarious name considering it's been caught in scandals involving money laundering, mafia connections, and suspicious deaths. In the 1980s, a banker connected to the Vatican Bank, Roberto Calvi, was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London. His pockets were stuffed with bricks and cash. The media called it suicide. Anyone with half a functioning neuron knows that was a message, that was ritualistic, that was cleanup. And who was behind it? Go ahead, pull the thread. You'll find connections to Masonic lodges, Jesuit black ops, and shadow clerics embedded in power for decades. Now, look at the external signs. After the 1963 enthronement, the entire trajectory of the church changed. Suddenly, the doctrine started shifting. The architecture became bolder, the symbols darker, the openness to interfaith rituals increased, not because the church suddenly became tolerant, but because it was being reprogrammed, because the figure they now served wasn't interested in salvation, but unification through control. Take the symbols etched into Vatican buildings. The pine cone statue in the court of the pine cone is not just Dika, it's a fertility symbol going back to Babylon. The obelisk in Sti. Peter's Square, that's Egyptian. It was literally hauled out of Heliopolis and planted right in front of the basilica. That's not Christian. That's Hermetic. That's sun worship, not a man worship. These symbols are everywhere if you know how to see them. The Layard of the Vatican courtyards, the sun wheel, the placement of key statues, the recurring serpent motives. This is the language of power, of hidden influence. They don't need to hide it, because the masses are conditioned to not question anything wrapped in holy branding. Now look at who's pulling strings from behind the scenes. The Jesuits. They were supposed to be missionaries and scholars. Today they're the intelligence wing of the church, trained in rhetoric, counterinsurgency, psychological operations. The current Pope, Francis, is the first Jesuit Pope in history. That should be a red flag. This isn't about religion anymore. It's about control. It's about hijacking the most powerful spiritual infrastructure in history and rerouting it toward a different deity. One who demands submission through manipulation, distortion, and inversion. And this system protects itself through Lee's ritual, symbolism, hierarchy, fear. Dissenters disappear, whistleblowers are discredited, internal resistance is crushed before it gains traction. They don't care about your prayers, they don't care about your faith. They've turned the church into a fortress of occult governance, and they're laughing while billions kneel before a god that was replaced decades ago. Let's talk about the thing nobody's supposed to talk about. The Vatican's secret archives. Technically, they rebranded it to the Apostolic Archive to sound more sterile, less ominous. But nobody's buying that crap. This place houses over 50 miles of shelving, tens of thousands of documents, manuscripts, forbidden texts, and classified correspondence locked behind steel doors and guarded like it's Fort Knox. And guess what? Almost none of it is open to the public, not even to Catholic scholars, unless they jump through 100 flaming hoops. You're not allowed in without special approval from the Pope or someone just under him. And even if you get access, you're only allowed to see specific documents by request. No random browsing. No wandering the stacks. Why? Because they are not preserving history. They're controlling it. They're sitting on material that would blow the entire narrative apart. This is where the real records are. The pre-canonized Gospels, the texts that expose the edited, manufactured version of Christianity that got approved by Constantine's council. They've got heretical scrolls locked away because those writings challenge the identity of the so. Called God, they preach. And that's why these archives are under maximum lockdown, because some of these texts point directly to Lucifer, not as the enemy, but as the liberator. And the God being worshipped by institutional Christianity as the deceiver that flips the whole foundation upside down. You open that door and the whole Vatican collapses, so instead they lock it underground. But the books are just the beginning. Let's talk about the architecture beneath the Vatican. There are chambers and tunnels beneath the basilica, the necropolis, and deeper sections that don't show up on any official map. You're not hearing this from tour guides. You're hearing it from contractors, former insiders, even rogue members of the Swiss Guard who've spoken anonymously. Some of these underground rooms are set up like ritual spaces, stone altars, obscure symbology, not Christian, not even ancient Roman. We're talking Babylonian, Phoenician, Egyptian. You think they're preserving history. They're preserving an unbroken occult lineage that predates Catholicism by thousands of years. The Vatican didn't eliminate the old gods. They absorbed them, repackaged them, and kept the rituals alive under new branding. And here's where it gets darker. Some of these underground chambers line up with energy grid points. You can scoff at that, but the ancient world didn't place temples randomly. Neither did the Vatican. These guys aren't stupid. They know how to harness energy, not just in metaphysical terms, but psychological and emotional energy. That's why they need masses of people performing rituals, pilgrimages, confessions, collective prayer, all directed energy. That's the engine of control. But beneath all of that is the priest class who directs that energy toward whatever force they serve. And that force is not the divine. Now, let's bring in the Luciferian element because, yes, it's here too. Embedded in these rituals, you've got hidden rooms reportedly containing effigies that do not represent a man in any form. Horned idols, winged humanoids, figures with serpentine features. And again, they keep this off the books. You won't find it in Vatican museums. These are private chapels for high-ranking initiates. Some of these figures resemble ancient Mesopotamian gods, Enki, Pazuzu, even depictions of Set from Egyptian law. It's the same archetype, the rebellious deity, the trickster, the knowledge giver, rebranded under a Christian villain narrative to justify persecution and blind obedience. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, they venerate him as the true power source. Go deeper, and you'll run into the Jesuit connection again. These aren't monks praying for your sins. They're trained tacticians. They have their own initiation process separate from standard priesthood. You don't rise in the Jesuit order unless you're fully indoctrinated. That includes exposure to materials and ceremonies the public church would call demonic. And it's not just symbolic. These guys perform actual rites of rituals of binding invocation and spiritual channeling. And don't be naive. These rituals aren't just about summoning or worship. They're about control. Information control, population control, consciousness control. They operate on the idea that ritual creates structure, and structure creates obedience. If they can anchor fear and guilt into you from childhood, they don't need chains or guns. They've got your soul caged before you hit puberty. Even the Pope doesn't operate independently. He's the frontman, the mascot. The real influence comes from the Black Pope, superior general of the Jesuits. He controls the network. He oversees the doctrine behind the doctrine. And yes, the Black Pope attends those private rituals. He doesn't wear white robes. He wears black for a reason. And don't forget the external connections. The Vatican has diplomatic immunity. It has embassies in over 180 countries. It operates as a sovereign city-state. That means it's untouchable. No law enforcement, no international tribunal. They can move people, objects, and information without scrutiny. When you put a ritual-based, secrecy-driven institution in a position of total global immunity, you're not looking at a religion. You're looking at a protected cult. If you're still looking at the Vatican and thinking this is just Christianity's HQ, you've missed the real game. The structure, the symbols, the alignments. It's not built to glorify God. It's built to encode a system of ancient worship hiding behind religious language. And once you see the pattern, you'll realize who they're really bowing to. His name isn't a man, it's Saturn. Yes, Saturn, the ancient god of time, harvest, control, and death, the one they used to sacrifice children to in open fires. Malachi, Chronos, El Baal. They're all variations of the same archetype. The Vera, the Reaper, the Enslaver, and now he's been sanitized and hidden under robes and cathedrals because Satan never went away. He just changed costumes, and the Vatican made him a throne. Let's start with the obvious, the black cube. Look it up. The symbol of Saturn has always been the cube. In physics, Saturn's north pole literally has a hexagonal storm pattern. A six-sided figure, a cube in 2 dimensions. Ancient cultures encoded this in every Saturnian cult. And surprise, inside Vatican City, black cube symbolism is embedded in statues, floors, and hidden architectural alignments. It's not a design accident, it's an invocation of presence. You think the Vatican's obsession with geometry is artistic. No, it's sacred geometry used to encode frequencies, control resonance, and amplify ritual effect. The placement of the obelisk in St. Peter's Square, that's not Catholic. That's Egyptian sun worship. The entire plaza is a massive sundial. And guess what? Saturn is the god of time. They don't worship the sun. They measure it to glorify Saturn's grip on time and death. That's why Saturn's color is black. That's why high priests wear black. That's why judges, popes, cardinals. These are Saturnian offices, black robes, red trim, authority through fear and judgment. Not enlightenment, not salvation, control through structure. That's Saturn's domain. Let's talk about the throne. The cathedral Petri, or chair of St. Peter, is housed in St. Peter's Basilica. They tell you it's symbolic of apostolic succession. But look closer. The whole structure is wrapped in what look like flames and demonic figures. The throne is suspended midair, surrounded by golden twisted forms that look more like spirits escaping hell than angels. You're not looking at a Christian relic. You're looking at a veiled Saturnian altar. And don't think, for a second, the popes don't know this. They're not confused, they're not blind, they're initiated. This symbolism is only confusing to the public because it's meant to be. It's a code. And if you're not part of the priest class or in a circle, you're not supposed to decode it. That's the game. Speak one language to the sheep, another to the architects of power. Look at the papyri regalia, the triple tiara, the fish head mitre. None of that comes from the Bible. That's Babylon. That's Dean. That's high priesthood from ancient mystery schools that use symbols used to mask who their gods really were. Every part of the Pope's outfit is a call back to pagan systems, not Christian humility. This isn't service, it's rulership, Saturnian rulership. Now, let's get into their calendar manipulation. The Sabbath used to be Saturday, Satan's day. That's not conspiracy, that's straight etymology. They changed it to Sunday much later, but the Saturnian structure remains underneath. In fact, Saturn is the root of discipline, restriction, law, and punishment, everything that defines the authoritarian character of Catholic doctrine. You want grace and love. That's not Saturn. That's foreign to their system. They talk a man, but they enforce Saturn. Still don't believe it. Look at the Vatican crest. The two keys, gold and silver, represent the balance of heavenly and earthly power. Sounds noble, but in alchemical terms, gold and silver are solar and lunar symbols, and in esoteric tradition, Saturn is the force that binds the sun and moon into the material prism. The keys don't unlock heaven, they lock the soul inside the system. It's metaphysical branding. You've been taught it's salvation, it's containment. Let's talk more about containment. The Vatican is built as a fortress, walls, gates, towers. Symbolic. No, it's literal. It's a stronghold for the Saturnian system. It exists to protect the knowledge, the rituals, and the lineage of worship that goes back long before Christianity was ever created. This isn't about hiding from enemies. This is about locking in the God they serve and locking you out. You ever wonder why all the ancient gods were absorbed by the church? Why statues of Zeus became Saint Peter? Why Isis and Horus were morphed into a woman and a man? It wasn't evangelism, it was takeover. They didn't destroy the old gods, they gave them new names and moved them into the basilica. The core system never changed, only the labels did. And here's where it hits the gut. People booing inside Vatican City don't realize they're booing to a Saturnian machine. They see crosses, candles, and scripture, but the energy, the layout. The ceremonies are feeding something else. That's the brilliance of the deception. It doesn't hide through absence. It hides through presence. Flood people with so much ceremony, so much beauty, so much emotional theater, and they'll never ask who the show is for. Let's pull the curtain back on the Vatican's obsession with blood. Not in metaphor, in actual lineage. We're not talking about parables or communion wine. We're talking about genetic continuity, dynastic succession, and control over who gets access to what power. Because here's the part that no pulpit, no pull of a TV preacher, no clean-cut bishop will ever touch. The Vatican structure is built on the backbone of a blood cult, not the blood of a man. The blood of ancient dynasties, the same families that have ruled since Sumer, Babylon, Egypt, and Rome. These elites trace their lines not through righteousness or spiritual authority, but through heredity. Why do you think the Catholic hierarchy operates like a monarchy? Why are cardinals selected in closed doors, behind thick curtains, with rituals that mirror royal coronations? Because it is a throne system. They call it the throne of Peter, but that's PR. In practice, it's a dynastic gatekeeping mechanism. You don't rise unless you're part of the club. Not spiritually, genetically, ideologically. Go read between the lines of Vatican diplomatic relationships. Who do they mingle with? Rothschilds, royals, global aristocrats, secret societies, the same families behind global banking. Global war machines, global pharmaco empires. You think that's about spreading the gospel? That's about consolidating ancient rule under a religious flag. Now tie that back to Lucifer, because they're not separating religion and power. They're using religion to preserve power. Luciferian doctrine in its truest form is about self-deification, selective evolution, and the belief that elite bloodlines are superior because they descend from divine origins. Look into any occult genealogy, and you'll find it claims of lineage from the Nephilim, the gods, the Watchers, and guess what? The Vatican never refutes this. They bury it 'cause parts of their own leadership believe it. Let's get into artifacts. There's a reason the Vatican hoards relics like a global collector cartel. They claim it's for preservation, but behind closed doors, they believe these items hold power. They've got skulls, bones, and remains of saints that aren't just symbolic. They're kept for energetic purposes. Ever wonder why reliquaries look more like ritual chambers than memorials? Because in esoteric belief, bones hold vibrational signatures, and high-level Vatican operators aren't just praying around these things. They're using them in closed ceremonies. Take the claim that the Vatican holds the spear that pierced a man's side, the spear of longness. It's not locked away for decoration. It's kept because they believe it carries blood memory. Control the blood, control the power. This is ancient magic masquerading as Christianity. And it's not just physical blood, it's spiritual DNA. They've encoded doctrines that manipulate how people think, feel, and even reproduce. Look at how the Church has dictated sexual behavior, marriage, childbirth, and gender roles for centuries. That's not morality, that's eugenics, social eugenics, psychological eugenics, behavioral sterilization. It's how you erase certain traits from populations, amplify others. You control the body through guilt. You control reproduction through dogma. You install a system where people police themselves. That's deeper than any government control. That's biopower. And the Vatican wrote the manual on it before Michel Foucault ever opened his mouth. Now connect this to ritual abuse, the stuff they work over time to bury. This isn't about bad priests getting out of line. This is systemic engineered, covered up not to avoid scandal, but to preserve a structure, because abuse in elite esoteric systems is often a mechanism controlled trauma programming and power transference. They don't just silence victims to avoid headlines. They do it because exposure would crack the core of the inner circle's initiation structure. You think that's extreme. Look at how consistent the pattern. Same regions, same profiles, same methods. It's not random, it's institutional. And every time it almost surfaces, boom, legal immunity, diplomatic shelter, and internal investigations. Name one other global institution that can shuffle rapists across borders without extradition. Only the Vatican. Because behind the sermons, you've got a system of hidden chambers, sacred bloodlines, and metaphysical control mechanisms. Let's talk about the Vatican's interest in DNA and the human genome. That's right. They're not just playing with old scrolls. They're funding genetic research. Why? Because they know what the ancient texts said. The soul isn't just floating energy. It's encoded, and by mapping DNA, you can trace spiritual inheritance. That's why they're obsessed with Jewish lineage, Davidic descent, and the true bloodlines of biblical figures. They are not reading stories. They're trying to locate God code inside people. Ever heard of Project Human or the Vatican's cooperation with Cyan and other physics-based entities? You think it's about theology and ethics. No, it's about quantum axis, dimensional manipulation. They're not trying to reach God. They're trying to unlock the source code, and they believe the key is inside us, in the blood, in the genetics, in the soul frequencies of selected lines. This isn't religious anymore. It's technocratic occultism, the marriage of dark metaphysics and elite science, the kind that doesn't show up in peer-reviewed journals, but moves billions in secret budgets. They're not scared of AI replacing religion. They're excited about AI enforcing it, digitally encoding spiritual obedience through neural interfaces, predictive behavioral tracking, and algorithmic sin management. The Vatican doesn't just influence religion. It's embedded in politics, intelligence, military alliances, banking systems, educational institutions, and psychological operations. The Holy See isn't some ancient holdover. It's the central node of an international spiderweb, cloaked in holiness, operating in pure geopolitical and metaphysical warfare. Start with this fact. The Vatican holds observer status at the United Nations. That's not a church thing. That's a sovereign state privilege. You think your local pastor gets to influence UN votes? No. But the Vatican does, because they've positioned themselves as a religious government. And governments listen to governments, not preachers. That means they sit at the table with global power brokers shaping policies and whispering into the ears of the elite. And this influence isn't passive. The Vatican has its own intelligence network. Ever heard of the Sudelium Pianum? It was a secret surveillance network operating under Pope Past to spy on dissenters within the church. Think CIA, but in cassocks. That evolved today. They use Jesuit-trained diplomats and clergy embedded around the globe, pulling intelligence through confessionals, embassies, and private religious institutions. These people don't need wiretaps. they've got priests in every high political, military, and financial structure feeding them information under the guise of spiritual counsel. Why do you think so many Catholic universities pump out future politicians and policy architects? It's not education, it's grooming, a soft indoctrination system cloaked in academia. They train people in rhetoric, obedience, loyalty to the Church's invisible hierarchy. And once those people get into power, they're already programmed to serve the machine. Let's talk military. The Vatican doesn't have a formal army, but they don't need one. They've partnered with sovereign governments for centuries to enforce their interests. From the Crusades to the Inquisition, and later through fascist regimes in Europe, the Vatican has always backed the sword when it serves their goal. They made deals with Mussolini, they cut pacts with Hitler, they helped Nazi war criminals escape via the Vatican rat lines after World War II. Go look that up. That's not theory. That's history. Thousands of Nazis, scientists, ideologues escaped to South America and even the U.S., aided by forged Vatican papers, church funding, and the protection of bishops. Why? Because the Church wasn't trying to stop evil. It was preserving assets. These were people with psychological warfare expertise, medical knowledge, occult ritual practice, and fanatical loyalty to hierarchical control systems, perfect match for a Vatican that needed to rebuild its influence post-war without firing a shot. Then they pivoted to soft power mass communication, Vatican radio, Catholic media outlets. Control the narrative, control the flock. Every message crafted for persuasion, guilt reinforcement, moral confusion, and dependency. Ever noticed how Catholic doctrine always centers around you being broken, needing guidance, needing confession? It's a cycle of disempowerment. That's Cult Strategy 181. Break them down. Build them up with your language, your tools, your authority. Now extend that control through education. Catholic schools exist on every continent. Billions of students go through catechism, religious studies, and doctrinal reinforcement starting as children. That's not education. That's neural formatting, ritual repetition, rote memorization, fear of eternal damnation drilled in before age 10. That's psychological warfare. You can't critically think when your nervous system is hardwired to associate questions with sin. Let's hit the core of it. Ritual programming. Catholicism is loaded with ceremony and sense, chants, robes, processions, kneeling, standing, reciting. Sounds familiar because that's how cults and military institutions condition behavior. It's entrainment. Get your body to obey, your mind follows, and they do it from cradle to grave, baptism. Communion, confession, confirmation, marriage, last rites. Every milestone is ritualized, and that ritual isn't just religious. It's an initiation into a hierarchy of control. And within the upper layers of that hierarchy, occult knowledge. Don't mistake public Catholicism for the real operation. The real operation is esoteric. That's why the Vatican documents on astrology, alchemy, astral projection, and ancient mystery schools are hidden in the archives. That's why they commissioned astronomical observatories and own the Lucifer telescope. That's why they preserve text from heretics, pagans, and sorcerers. They don't believe the world is flat and ruled by angels. They know it's coded, engineered, and spiritually dynamic, and they use that knowledge for influence, not salvation. Now, here's the kicker. They interface with other cult systems, Freemasons, Rosicrucian. Gnostic revivalists, Kabbalists. The outer church condemns them. The inner church works with them. Ritual exchange, symbolic overlap, ideological mergers. You think the Eye of Providence is just a Masonic thing. Look closer at Vatican art. It's there, too. You think the hexag is just Jewish. Look at the basilica floor patterns. You think the phoenix, obelisk, lion, and serpent are pagan. They're all over church iconography, hiding in plain sight, because the game isn't to kill opposing systems. It's to merge and control them. Create dialectics, control both thesis and antithesis, then engineer the synthesis, Helian strategy at a metaphysical level. And the Vatican has played this better than anyone. They've infiltrated governments, subverted revolutions, redirected heresies, and used their global network to extract loyalty from both peasants and kings. And at the center of all that is the priesthood of Saturn, hiding under crosses, hosting those doctrine behind closed doors. You think the Vatican's influence ends with Sunday Mass? No. It shapes how countries legislate morality, how science defines the soul, how war justifies itself, and how history is edited for compliance. Here's where it all converges. The Vatican is not in the business of saving souls. It's in the business of reprogramming them. You're not dealing with a religion. You're dealing with a spiritual operating system, one that hijacks the divine impulse, rewrites it, and sends it back into the world as a product, safe, obedient, drained of power, loaded with guilt, and hardwired for compliance. The God they give you isn't a creator, he's a middle manager, a heavily branded authority figure, propped up to keep the masses spiritually neutered. You pray to him, but you get nothing back except shame, fear, silence, or the demand for more obedience. That's not divinity, that's enthronement, Tedder's Aventuren, a siphon. The true divine is unmediated. The Vatican makes damn sure that connection never happens without them standing in the middle. And here's how they do it. Through language manipulation. Ever wonder why the Church kept its rituals in Latin for centuries? It wasn't tradition, it was gatekeeping. People weren't supposed to understand what was being said. That's by design. Because if you understood the full content of those prayers and chants, you'd see half of them don't align with any modern concept of mercy or divinity. Some of those rites are invocations layered with double meanings, reversals, and ancient code built to channel power not granted. Even now, in vernacular services, the structure remains the same: disempowerment through repetition, confession of sin, submission to hierarchy, and pledging allegiance to an authority. You can't question without being accused of spiritual treason. And they run this script globally like a psychological firmware update. Weekly Mass isn't worship, it's programming. Next, look at how they own death. They literally script your final rites. They own the last moment of your life. And it's not a gentle farewell. It's a contract renewal, a final stamp of submission before you're recycled through a system they still claim to own. Last rites, absolution prayers. For the dead, they are not just rituals. They are signature locks, closing your spirit under the Vatican brand. This is spiritual dram, and you don't even realize you signed up. Now zoom out. Their ultimate ambition is planetary control, not political spiritual. That's why they send missionaries, build churches in every country, and place bishops like chess pieces. Not to help the poor. That's a distraction. The real aim is planetary soul governance. They want jurisdiction over what people are and not just what they believe. This is metaphysical colonization, and they've nearly pulled it off. You think all these ecumenical movements, interfaith dialogues, global religious unity events are about peace. No, they're about consolidation. Bringing all belief systems under one umbrella, with the Vatican in the center claiming to be the voice of God for all humanity. That's not faith. That's merger and acquisition strategy. They don't want your spirituality. They want your compliance. And if they can cloak it in divine language, even better. And here's the kicker. The final frontier is digital. The Vatican is now investing in AI ethics, blockchain identity, and digital confessional systems. You heard me. They're building infrastructure to control spiritual life online. That's where this is going. Confession via app, AI priest bots, soul scoring systems tied to digital identity. You think that's science fiction? They're already drafting the framework, because the next iteration of religious control won't be through pulpits. It'll be through algorithms. The new priests are code and the new temples are your screens, and don't think for a second that's some progressive move. This is surveillance theology, a 24/7 God model that doesn't sleep, doesn't forget, and never forgives unless the system says so. It's not enough to believe anymore. You have to log in, be scanned, complete, and renew your spiritual license. One God, one network, one interface, and it's not benevolent. Because behind it all, the same agenda remains: spiritual containment. They've just upgraded the tools from Latin to live stream, from ritual robes to biometric robes, from confessionals to data servers, from marble cathedrals to metaverse sanctuaries. Same power, same control, just rebranded for the next generation of blind obedience. And through it all, the Luciferian current winds under the surface, not in pitchforks and fire, but in strategy, in inversion, in the total subversion of divine sovereignty. That's the real signature. The replacement of internal connection with external mediation. The replacement of truth with authority. The replacement of spirit with system. So here we are. You've seen the snake-shaped hall. You've seen the rituals, the architecture, the symbols, the bloodlines, the archives, the hidden chambers, the alliances, the mind control, the surveillance rollout. And now you know this is not just a religion. It's the most advanced soul manipulation system ever built. And now that you've seen it, you don't get to unsee it. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, you're not just a viewer, you're a problem for their system. Keep asking, keep digging, keep burning the veil, and I'll see you in the next.